Good morning, everybody. It's Saturday morning. I want to hit on a little bit. This probably will be a regular teaching video that'll go up in a few days. I got one that probably will go up today that I made a few days back. And I'm reading Acts, and I'm reading some of the prophets of the Old Testament. And I'm just going to share. I read Psalms and Proverbs a lot. And so I'm going to maybe just not teach a whole thing on those, but share every now and then. I want to hit on, I don't know if I should tell this one. When I go into Walmart, I'll tell it. When I go into Walmart with Pops, there's a Walmart on the street here in Corpus Christi, Staples. And in that Walmart, Pops, he needs it for various things because his friend sends him $25 every now and then, and he's got to go there for whatever it is, Western Union. But I told Pops, when I go in with Pops, I'm nice when I'm with Pops, and I'll buy a few little items, and Pops goes around, and so a couple of times, and I'll explain it. You'll think, no, John, there's some guy that's a door checker. Now, the door checkers at Walmart here in Texas, they don't check your receipts a lot here, okay? Up north in New Jersey when I'm there and all, I know they do that a lot. Here they don't. But there's this one guy, I called him the older guy I'll tell you the story. He's probably about my age, but I say that because he seems to look older than the other door checkers. But a few times I've been with Pops, I check out nice, and I'm happy when I'm with the, Pops and these guys. You don't see me mad on those types of videos. I notice when I watch them. And he called me over like, hey, come here. And I don't like that. And he goes through my bag, checks the receipt. Look, he's sort of like some of the people I've talked about that, they use their authority type thing. I'm the wrong guy to do that, but I let it slide. Then he did it again, and there might be 6 people leaving the store. And he'll say, right in the middle of the 6 people, you. And I was nice the last time it happened. I was. Now, I even videotaped it. I took the camera out. I said, this is the guy that keeps stopping me. And he had his face on the video. And then I told him, I said, look, I might look like suspicious because I'm in black and I have long hair. And I said, I'm a retired firefighter, I do ministry. And I showed him, the card. And the first time he actually stopped me, when he was done, he said, God bless you. Which, that's why I told him, actually, I do ministry. That's why you hear me and see me in here with the old man. But then he did it again, various times. At that stage, it was like he was saying, you ain't going to tell me. Now, I complained I went in mad one day because I was going to avoid that Walmart. But my wife wanted to go to a store that's next to that Walmart. And she likes going into that one. It's a Sutherland's Housing Supply. This was like a few weekends ago. And she said, let's go to Walmart. Now, I didn't want to tell her. I kind of fibbed a little. I said, well, Pops don't like that stuff. I didn't want to go in because, I said, Pops, they give Pops a hard time. I didn't want to say, because she knows the way I am. But I said, well, I'll meet you over there. And I walked over. The Sutherland's Housing Supply is very close. And I said, I want to talk to the guy in charge. Who's your guy in charge? And then I told him, that's a black guy. And I talked to 2 guys. I said, look, I'm going to tell you what the story is. I said, and basically I said, I'm going to sue your asses if you keep doing this. I said, because you got to have some rules here. He says, well, they're not allowed to take the stuff out or check it unless there are rules that, he said, the policy. My wife used to work for Walmart. And he said, there are policies. And what he told me, he said, no, he's not allowed to just stop you like the way he's been stopping you. And I said, look, I deal with a lot of police stuff and harassment things. I said, I don't want to be dealing with it like in a store where somebody's telling me I'm going to stop you. I said, I just shop at the stores. I don't come to this one anymore, which was true. He said, no, I want you to come. I'll take care of it, I promise. I said, because I said, I'll sue you. I said, I will sue you. And I gave him the card. I said, go look at my site. So, I don't keep going back. But yesterday, on the way back from hanging up no trespassing, I said, I'm going to go see if that guy's... I did. So I drove back into town. It was still a little wired. But I didn't see that guy at that door in a while, and I haven't really gone back. And then when I walked in, he was there. And I just walked up to him and didn't do no crimes. I said, what's your name? I said, I want your name. Now, he saw me different. He saw me different. He never saw me like that. I said, what's your full name? I said, I'm going to have a lawsuit against you guys. Now, give me your name. And he was like not going to give me his name. I said, come here. Come here now. And he followed me. I said, now we're going to go talk to your boss. And I found the thing. And I basically said, I said, look, I talked to, it was a different manager. I said, I talked to the other guy last time. I said, and this guy pulls me out of line because whatever reason he got upset that I told him, look, I'm in here doing ministry. And I tried to be nice about it. So I chewed him out. I told the guy, I said, look, you deal with this guy. I said, or I'm going to sue you for profiling. I said, no, but that's the first time I actually let that guy know in the store. I said, and I told Pops a little bit, not that much. And Pops says, oh, I know that guy. Pops says, he's got one of those authority problems. Pops knows about that guy. He said, yeah, he's like that. And I know guys like that in just general in the field. So I wanted to share that. I might talk a little this morning on, I mentioned on those quick videos I made, just the ones I was uploading to Facebook only, I think. I mentioned about creationism, and because I was talking about the point of singularity. And I want you to understand something. When we use John, some might be confused, so that's why I'm going to deal with this. The term creationism came to be applied to define Christians who believe in what we call a young earth, meaning the earth and the universe are only about 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And they take a literal interpretation of the book of Genesis in the creation account. Now, all Christians believe in creation, okay? Meaning God created all things. Okay? All Christians believe that. And if you have somebody that says, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in God created things, or I don't believe in God, then they are using the term Christian, but they're not Christian. Okay, so historic orthodoxy believes that God created all things. But in the Christian view, some debate whether or not the earth is more like 13 to 14 billion years old, or whether the earth, and they arrive at those beliefs, and this is a very long debate within Christianity. And a few things I want to say is, I read a book, and I gave that book away, but it was a book that came out a few years ago, and it came out for the purpose of giving the best defense for Christians who did believe that the account of Genesis that we read in Scripture, you go all the way back to that time. That's how you get about the 6,000 year time, because that's the dating back. And they say that's the time, that's the age of the earth. Now, in this debate, and I have said, when you hear me say creationism, what I mean is I lean towards believing the older earth, okay, and universe. The earth, maybe science is saying about 4 billion, the universe about 14 billion years old, for various reasons. But I do want to say it's common in our day to kind of make fun of the Christians who believe, and a lot of times on these documentaries they'll interview people, oh, you really believe the earth is only 6,000? Let me tell you, I'm familiar with this, and I've read this because I like doing a lot of science. There are not, an argument can be made for what we call catastrophism, okay? Catastrophe. Catastrophe means this. Catastrophism means this. In this debate, some say, but look at the effects we see on the planet. The Grand Canyon, things that would have taken the tectonic plates, which we do understand. I want you also see if I remember. I want you to see how much water's on that thing. But the tectonic plates and the breaking up of the continents. Let me say, there are verses in Genesis, in the Bible, that talk about the depths being broken up. You have verses that you could say right in Scripture that define during the time of what we call Noah's flood, the great flood. It says the depths were broken up. There was water coming up out of the earth during the time of the flood. And so those who look at a young earth, and even some who do not look at a young earth, but they will say the effects that we see, some of them might not have been effects that took many, millions of years to produce. Some of the effects could have been through catastrophe. That's why you have that term, catastrophism. If you had a huge thing, for instance, even in the debate on how did the dinosaurs die, most see it was a meteor that hit the earth at a certain period. But it could have been through the flood. And even in the debate about the flood, and Christian theologians, some say the flood was not a worldwide flood, and they have some reasons for that. They say, but the world at that time, there's some have good arguments that that whole region flooded, okay? Not the whole earth. But is it possible that the whole earth could have ever flooded? I've heard scientists on the other side kind of make fun and say, how could like it's a joke, like how could you even believe that the whole earth, and some said it just could never, that's like silly, a fairy tale, because it just is impossible. Now look at this, okay? Look at this. See the blue? Look at the blue. I didn't even realize I had the globe, Look how much water you have on this planet. And some of those same scientists who mocked that how could you ever have a time where the whole earth was underwater, sort of like, where would you get all the water from? I just showed you. And some of those same scientists in the last few years, we believe one of the planets, I forget which one it is now, Mars, but one of the planets science now is confident that at one point was totally underwater. And that planet, as we know it today, has absolutely zero water on it. None. But they're confident, and maybe it was. But they're very willing to accept that a planet besides the Earth, at one time in its past, was completely covered by water, though there's not one speck of it on there today. And some of those same scientists will look at the planet Earth and say, how could the Earth ever have been covered with water? So, John, why would they, mock a planet that has majority water right now and say it's just ridiculous? It's because they have a religious bias. Okay? That's why. There are legitimate arguments made, and there are legitimate questions. And so when we deal, I hold to an older Earth theory. During the time of the 1700s, and I talk a lot about the great things that took place over the centuries, the scientific revolution, and I talk about a lot of these. But during the time of the 1700s and the French Revolution and Napoleon and that time, you had what was called the French encyclopedists. Read about them a very long time ago. I've not read about them recently. But they were not encyclopedia makers, I remember, because I thought at the time when I read it, this is something you learn. They're not talking about encyclopedias. But these were men like Diderot, okay? These were men that were saying, the advance of science now is getting so far, we have no more need for the church or for God to explain the things that we're learning in science and philosophy and all. That's what these men were saying. And one of the things they based that erroneous view on was what's called spontaneous generation, meaning they began to believe that things popped into existence, life came into existence out of nothing, okay? And this was a very serious belief that scientists held to for quite some time. And in the time of Charles Darwin, in the 1800s, who popularized evolution because it still was believed in some, and some think Darwin stole the idea from somebody else. But in the idea of evolution, this was a basic plank to evolutionary theory. This is what was called spontaneous generation. Why did they believe that? You had things that got a little water on the floor, it rained. You had like pools of water that you would see. We were observing things. And then you would see like little fish or tadpoles or stuff. And people were sincerely believing, this is before we had the ability to, understand as much as we understand today. And they said, wow, that these fish just popped into existence, in this pool of water. But you had birds carrying things or things, microorganisms and things that we know about today. But spontaneous generation, even in the schools of higher education, if you studied science in the last, 100 years, 50 years, when you study science in school, biology, you'll be taught that this was once highly held. Intelligent men held this view, and today you're taught, everybody's taught, Christians, atheists, everybody's taught that view was false. And they say spontaneous generation, like I just explained, was held by men, and I want you to see that it dated back to the French encyclopedists, who were the atheists coming up saying, these are proofs that we no longer need to believe in God to do science. But they were wrong, and science today understands that. But this was a big plank in the belief of evolution, because if you had things that could pop into existence out of absolutely nothing, life in that case, then you could have explanations. There's no need, like the encyclopedia said, for God. Diderot and others said. Now we know that's false, and if somebody held to that view today, we would say they're ignorant. We would say they're ignorant. But, and even in the schools today, you're taught, if higher education, you're taught that nobody holds that belief anymore. But that's not true. That belief is the most common belief for the explanation of the universe and of the earth that atheists use. Men like Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, though he's not a physicist like Christopher Hitchens. They were not physicists. These were just intelligent atheists. But Dawkins and Hawking are. They still try to teach a view which is non-scientific and which is illogical. When they launched the Hubble, I'm going back a ways here, but when Hubble was launched, the great telescope, there was a famous scientist, I think an astrophysicist, who said, it was a big thing. They made like a big thing about it. And it said, this is history now. I didn't hear it myself, but I learned it. But he said, about 14, maybe to 18 billion years ago, the universe exploded into being by chance. And because that man, I'm sure, was a sincerely smart man, and in the field of science and physics, I'm not a physicist, I never said I was. But you had historically theology, the study of God, as the main study when you studied higher education. And philosophy was her handmaiden. Theology was the queen of the sciences, and philosophy was her handmaiden. And science was right in there, and it didn't have a special extra tag, and later it did. So science comes out as a separate field of study in itself. It really comes out of the foundation of theology and of philosophy. But then as time progressed, and you see me cover the philosophers and all, science became sort of like the unchallenged high priests of a certain, like, religion almost. Okay? Some define secularism and atheism as religion itself. And so some embrace, and they say, this man is Hawking. How could you ever challenge Hawking? Hawking has made many, many unscientific and nonsensical statements, Stephen Hawking. And he was called out on that by other men who were not believers, not Christians, just the chair of the philosophy department, I believe, when Hawking came out with his book, the chair of the philosophy department, who's not even a believer or Christian, said, I'll tell you that, he rebuked Hawking for some of his things that he was coming up with. Because these scientists were basically using language, borrowing it from the field of theology and philosophy, and adding it to what they believe, putting it all together, and the average person who's out there, watching Carl Sagan, who I like Sagan, though he was an atheist, and they could see that, yes, in their field of science, yes, I'm grateful for it. But the problem with that is, and those men, is then they come to their own conclusions about the things that they're observing and make statements that are non-scientific. John, what was wrong with the statement of that scientist who said, at the launching of the Hubble telescope, who said, some 14 to 18 billion years ago, the universe exploded into being out of chance? Science teaches us this. This is science, and this is logic, and this is philosophy, which all go together. There's an ancient maxim, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Science teaches us when you have nothing, absolutely nothing, you can never have something come out of nothing. That, you said, we all understand that. We should all understand that. But the statement that the universe exploded into being out of nothing by chance is non-scientific, and it's a nonsense statement. Why? Chance is what? The word chance is what? The word chance is a perfectly good word, but the word itself simply describes the mathematical odds of something happening. And if you flip a coin, I have dice here, if you roll dice, you say the chances are the coin will hit heads every time, the chances are. The word is just describing the mathematical odds of a thing. Okay. Chance itself does not have being. Okay. This is why I said that guy made a statement, and the statement being explode into being, that's loaded with philosophy, that statement, and theology. And so if that scientist says, I'm only dealing in science, and then you can't be taking words and trying to define them if you're giving them the wrong definition. Then you've made a mistake. And he did that in that statement. So chance, if you flip that coin, or you roll those dice, the reason sometimes the coin hits heads and tails is because there's all types of variables. When it's flipped, how did it start? Football game, who's going to go? all types of variables that we're not sure of. But if you had that coin in a laboratory and on the machine, and you put it on heads or tails, and you knew it was going to go up and it was going to flip exactly so many revolutions, exactly the same time, in a controlled environment, you could actually know how that coin's going to land. If everything there was controlled, you could know how. It starts a certain way, it goes so many times every time, there's no wind in the room, you could know. You could say, yes, we can make it do that. And some people even mess with things like fixed dice. So chance is not some type of outside agency that's having an effect on something. It does not have what's called ontological status, okay? And I don't want to just use the big word, but I have to. Ontology is the study of the nature of being, something that exists. Even physical things in this room exist. So I could throw something. It's got real matter, okay? They're different beings, human beings are a different class, and God himself is self-existent, the supreme being. But chance is nothing, okay? Chance does not have that. Chance is nothing. Chance is no thing. It's not anything. And so when people make these statements that the universe exploded into being out of nothing by chance, that is non-scientific and it's nonsensical. Do you understand now? Because what they're ascribing to the word chance in that statement is that chance did that. And you say, John, that's not what they mean. I understand that's not what they mean, but that's what they're saying. And so we live in a day where we just kind of feel like, well, so-and-so said a certain thing, and we then believe it. I didn't want to debate. I wanted to clarify when I said creationism. It's really come to be defined as those who hold to a young earth theory and a literal interpretation of Genesis, that the days are 24-hour days. And I'll say, people that hold to that, there are some very intelligent people that hold to that. Some of the arguments against evolution. One of the famous families of the Leakeys, one of the big questions, honest questions about evolution were what's called, I couldn't do it all, but it's called the fossil evidence, the missing fossil evidence. They believe that if everything did, all the species slowly evolve, you'd find a bunch of fossils to show that. You said, John, we have a lot of fossils. No, we don't have the fossils of what's called the transitional species. As a matter of fact, the ones that they say, now we found one, the missing link thing. You should have found many, not one. You're looking for thousands. That became a big question. They said, why are we not finding all of these transitional fossils? And even one of the Leakey daughters, I believe, famous scientist, family, said, was coming to believe that, not from any Christian view, that because of the lack of this transitional fossils, they were doubting the theory of evolution. Just completely, not because of Christian views. Or they said, no, we have a big problem. How did they ever resolve that? It's funny. It's not, but the Christian side who denied evolution, even the scientists who denied it, that God could have used evolution, some say, no, we don't believe it. Now, one of their strongest arguments was that look, there's no explanation why we don't have all the transitional fossils that we should be having. And they're saying the fact that we don't have these fossils shows us that the evidence does not show the slow evolution of things over very long periods of time, but the evidence shows things came to existence at once, boom, boom, set periods of time. That was their argument. The evolutionist side said, no, we're going to find them. And so here's the debate. One view of the Christian creationist. Now, not all Christians hold to some believe that God could have used evolution. It's called theistic evolution. Okay, some believe and hold to that. But I'm just giving you this debate between these groups here. And so one side saying, we're showing you from the evidence, from the fossil evidence, that things did not slowly evolve over long periods of time, because the fossil evidence does not show any of these transitional species. And the other side kept saying, we're going to find them someday. And there were different excuses that they came up with why we didn't find them. And finally, the thing they settled on was this. They said, we solved it. And they called it punctuated equilibrium. And some of the discovery, some of the things from John Nash, Princeton, that he got the Nobel Prize for, equilibrium, this was also used in this argument. And punctuate, they use big words, right? Immanuel Kant and John Kerry. Dash, ISIS says, you call us Dash again, Kerry, we're going to cut your tongue out. Throw some politics in. Punctuated equilibrium. They said, here it is. Everything's been going along at a steady pace. Evolution's been going along. And they said, all of a sudden, boom, long timeline, punctuated equilibrium. It's going even, but boom. All of a sudden, like overnight, the species evolved. So now evolution became, to that argument, not evolution, which is a slow, long process of change. It became creation in definition, but they kept the term evolution on it. When they did that, punctuated equilibrium says that. That's the excuse they finally gave for the missing fossil evidence. They said evolution was going along so long, and the species changed so quick, they changed, that we don't have the evidence, because, and that was an excuse. But any thinking person would say that's it. They capitulated to the creationist side there, because the argument for the creationist was exactly that things did not slowly evolve over long hundreds, thousands of years, but it happened at once, meaning creation. And the evidence for their side was the fossil evidence shows it happened at once, because we can't find all the various transitional fossils. And the other side, instead of admitting they were wrong, they said, you're right, we don't find them. And what you said all along, that it happened at once, we're just basically agreeing to that, but we're going to rob that and put the title punctuated equilibrium on it and claim it as proof for evolution. Now that one thing that I showed you shows you that in that whole field, there's a lot of dishonesty, a lot of questions. And so I didn't plan on doing it, and I didn't study any of that in a very long time. I think I've covered it more in the past on even some of the old radio programs. But some of the French encyclopedists recently on the CDs I'm listening to, which I've heard before, that did come up, and it reminded me to add some of that. But evolution, I've not studied that in a while, all that I'm discussing. So what I want you to see in the end, this will be a teaching video, but in the end, if in this whole field of arguing for God and existence of God, the atheist basically has to attack the plank of creation itself. And we didn't always believe. Is it non-scientific, John, and is it illogical to believe that there's something that is self-existent or infinite? No, that's not irrational. The term out of nothing comes is basically verifying the law of cause and effect, the law of causality, which means every effect has to have a cause. Every effect has to have a cause. But by necessity, there has to be something that was uncaused at some point in the past. Because if you have nothing that had self-existence, which we know to be God, then you can't just keep going back. That's called an infinite regress. Some argue that there was just so many big bangs, and they're nonstop. You have so many of exploding universe, and that just never began. Some use that argument. which is nonsense. They say, well, there was no beginning point. Even mathematically, you couldn't have something like that. It wouldn't work, the formula. At one point, something, in order that anything exists now, then God exists. That's the most simplest way I could put it. Because we used to think that the universe itself was that self-existent thing. We used to think the universe, everybody didn't believe that, but just in the field of science, we used to think that it always was. And the great breakthroughs that I talked about in last month, the scientific breakthroughs in the 20th century with Einstein and the man I wrote about recently, the Catholic scientist, we now know that the universe did explode into being, but not out of nothing, not by chance. See, it did explode into being, if you want to use that terminology, by God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay? So all of this stuff we learn, that creation is a wonderful thing, and science is a great thing. It's just, science has to, if they want to debate ontology, and they want to talk about being, they want to say we now have proof that God does not, you're out of your field there, my friend. And so be humble in your field, Mr. Hawking, because then when you jump out of your field and somehow you say, I'm going to prove God does not exist, and you make one of the biggest scientific blunders, in the last 50 years by saying gravity created itself because of the necessity of gravity needing so, and then you flubbed. It was a violation of the law of non-contradiction. Violation of the law of cause and effect, violation of all scientific laws, because you wanted to say God does not exist, and that's where you threw that out. So we need to, before we run headlong into the belief, don't ever forget, the most brightest, brilliant scientists in the world, at one point, who were mocking God and making fun of Christianity, they believed that tadpoles popped into existence out of nothing. Who's the fool? The fool has said in his heart there is no God. Amen.